Hi, I'm Cyndi Lee.
And I'm Parr.
And this is Om Yoga Today. Today we're going to talk about the evolution of yoga. But before we get to that, please don't forget to like and subscribe below. So the evolution of yoga is really a kind of a big topic.
Yeah.
So actually, we're not going to talk about the whole evolution of yoga altogether. But we did want to talk about some poses, how poses are being taught that might be different than how they were taught when I learned them, or even before that, and how they're being taught by you and people even in the generation after you. And we also wanted to talk and look at some specific poses and instructions that I think have evolved in a way that's healthy and safe. So I really like this idea, and I suggested it to you, and you took it in a whole different direction.
Right. So Cyndi suggested this, and what I thought about instantly in the evolution of yoga is how the pedagogy practice has changed itself, the actual teaching, holding the space, and the way that the information is delivered. And it might be, to use a slightly bougie word, the zeitgeist of the moment, but a few things that popped instantly to mind were how we use our hands in class.
Yeah.
Adjusting verbally versus actual manipulation, being informed of trauma, right? More and more people, as we've kind of come to value mental health, are expressing that they had trauma at some point in their life, and how that we as yoga teachers can hold the space for that, obviously recognizing we can't know every person's trigger, but just being aware of creating an environment that can be as safe for as many people as possible. And then also what the nature of the offering. Is this sort of a contemplative or spiritual offering? Is this just enlightened exercise? Like, what and how do we package all of this thing in this ocean of yoga, and how we're presenting it forward? So vast, like how we can talk about how it's evolved since it first sort of, bubbled up, and how we're, relating to it now. Especially for me, I'd love to dig in a little bit about the use of hands, especially being a male presenting teacher, like holding the space, feeling like I'm skilled enough to use my words and not necessarily feeling like I need to touch anyone anymore, which is interesting to me because I love receiving adjustments, and it doesn't really matter the gender expression of the teacher.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a big change. So many studios, the culture is the teacher manipulates and adjusts and changes and twerks, and maybe not twerks, but tweaks. And how students respond to that is another form of connection.
Yeah.
Because we can communicate with our hands, but also now recognizing that a lot of people don't know how to communicate. They don't want to be touched. And as we've seen more and more cases of people abusing their power as someone in the teacher seat, how do we hold all of that, not make it so sterile that we're afraid to touch each other, because connection and touch is so healing and important, but also recognizing that this is an important conversation to have.
It is a very important conversation to have, and it's so interesting to me because when I first started doing a lot of yoga as an adult, I started yoga in 1971, so I was, almost an adult, kind of adultish. But my teacher didn't touch us, but then I started going to more yoga classes, and in particular in New York, and my teachers were really, I would say, heavy-handed, but that was their method. And in fact, that was the primary method of teaching, was using their hands and their whole body. They would lie on top of you in Paschimottanasana, try to get you to get completely over. And I was already completely over. Like, I could fold completely. There was nowhere left to go. And yet a teacher would lie on top of me, and et cetera, And so I think, when I think about that, I don't like that so much. Not because I don't want to be touched. I don't mind being touched, but I don't want to get hurt.
Right.
But also, what is that saying to me? Is that saying you're not enough? You're like completely folded in half, and yet that's not good enough. You've got to go farther. You've always want to go farther or deeper, right? Can you go deeper in the pose? Well, what is deeper in the pose? Does that mean really that you're twisting your spine 2 times around, And so it cultivates craving, it cultivates dissatisfaction, and that's a principle of yoga.
Right.
Contentment.
Right.
Can we be okay with where we are right now? Can we be honest about where we are, which is maybe more, maybe less? That's interesting to me.
Yeah.
That's an interesting practice of yoga. So I don't like that way of adjusting, and even the word adjusting is weird.
Right.
And I don't think correcting is the right word. I don't like the word cue at all. Don't get me started on that even. That's
Next
a whole nother
episode.
episode. Yeah. But so I had this one student. Every time she came to someone's class and she hadn't had that teacher before, she would say, I just want to let you know that I don't want to be adjusted. So this was before we had awareness around trauma-informed yoga and touching and a lot of dynamics power dynamics that we know about now, that we're trying to know about and be appropriate. But I felt from her like, okay, I was just like, okay, great, you're so welcome to come. And I heard some of the other teachers talking about her and going like, what is her problem? That's so weird. And I said, we don't know, but we know that she asked that.
Right.
So we have to respect that. And they were like, yep, okay, cool. So she continued to come. She got really into it. She came to special workshops. She came to meditation. She was really at the studio all the time. And it was a great opportunity for me as a teacher to hone my language, as you were saying. But then one day, she was in my class. It was just an ordinary day, and she was in my class, and she was in a twist, and I wanted to make this subtle adjustment on her, or whatever word we're using.
Right.
And I just didn't have a word for it. And spontaneously, I said to her, I really want to touch you right now to give you this adjustment. And she said, okay.
Oh.
And I mean, I did it very subtly, just like something like that. And she responded to it. And we didn't have to talk about it. It was no big deal in a way, but it meant so much to me that, I was able to respect her long enough for her to feel safe.
Yeah.
And that I didn't just think that and touch her, but I said, I want to help you this way. So, that was an evolution.
Right.
Also of a way to offer something.
We do our best to meet students exactly where they are.
Yeah.
And as we've said in a previous episode, so much of teaching is entering into conversation.
Yeah.
And I think there is a skillful means to using your hands as a part of that conversation, but it's so nuanced and complex, and that's sort of what we're navigating now. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and we both have said, like, our motivation is to try and be helpful. In Buddhism, there's a slogan, drive all blames into one. So if something isn't working, if the student isn't responding as you want them to, you say, how can I communicate better?
Right.
What other skillful means can I have? Can I change my language? Can I demonstrate? Can I say, I'd like to touch you? And so that's part of the practice of yoga.
Right.
So when we're talking about evolution of poses, of teaching poses, it's not just how the pose is taught, but how we teach. So do you want to try a pose?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's look at some.
Okay. So Virabhadrasana 1, Warrior 1, I was taught this pose a certain way with specific instructions that I disagree with now. So we want to go through this pose and show you how I was taught and how I would teach it now and why. Let's try a pose. Okay. So we're going to do Virabhadrasana 1 or Warrior 1. And I'm going to take off my little red Berkeys here and show everybody how I was taught to do this pose and then to teach this pose. And I'm not going to keep in that way very long because I don't think it's really good. Okay, so put your hands on your hips. And first thing we're going to talk about is really building from the ground up. So this leg is what we could call Tadasana, and this leg is externally rotated. And we'll talk about that more in a second. Because some people think it's internally rotated. You want to make sure you can see this foot going out like this. So what I learned is that you make the hips square. So he's doing that now. And you can see that it actually does dump a little bit into the low back. But the problem with this is that it requires way more mobility than almost anybody has. And so that starts to really jam up the SI joints. And it isn't really possible for like 99% of the world to square off their pelvis. So it endangers the knee will start to bend, and the whole thing goes down the toilet. So we're gonna let this hip come back a little bit here. Okay, and before you even bend your knee, so another thing that would happen would be teachers would come around and square the hips for the students. And then, the student would try to hold that shape. And I think that's quite dangerous. So we're gonna start with how I would teach it now. So we're looking at the feet. This leg is in Tadasana. So when we talk about the rotation of a thigh in relationship to the pelvis, that's what rotation is. So this leg is not rotated in and it's not rotated out, correct? It's neutral.
Neutral.
That's Tadasana. This leg is rotated out. If your foot is pointing out that way, that's a sign. That's like an arrow that says my leg is rotating away from my body, external rotation. A lot of people think this is internal rotation. And so then they think, okay, well, we'll take the whole pelvis around. The pelvis and the thigh move separately, okay? So this leg is rotated out and the energy spirals around and down here into the inner heel. This is a little detailed, but if you're a yoga teacher or a yoga student, I hope you're interested. And then there's the actual movement of the leg, and there's the energetic effort. The energetic effort is internal, so that would be the secondary rotation. Primary rotation, turning out. Secondary rotation is drawing in. So as you bend your front leg, Hunt, think of this secondary rotation reaching back. And you're only gonna go where you can go, keeping your leg totally straight. If your leg starts to bend, you've gone too far, this back leg. This leg must be straight. This leg is the anchor. Same even in a lunge. The back leg must be straight. The back leg is the anchor. And that determines how far the front leg can bend. So for him, the front leg can bend there. Some people are confused and they say, make this leg be 90 degrees. That is not the tent pole that you build the pose around. The tent pole that you build the pose around is the safety of the back leg. Okay, so then from there, he can, as you feel your inner thigh energetically roll back, you can invite your belly to scoop to the left, okay? And then you pick your own ribs up, yeah? And take your arms straight up. So the chest is pointing forward, but the pelvis is on an angle. And this is a safe pose. And then lastly, the arms. So I'm seeing a lot of arms like this, or like this, or like whatever. Whatever, I don't think whatever is in yoga. No, we don't do whatever in yoga. So the arms are externally rotating as well, and reaching up where they can when they're straight. If they're not straight here, they could be straight here, they could be straight here, but they're not gonna go like this, which looks like the cover of every book about yoga, okay? So see what you can do that actually supports your body. And so the one way that I would teach yoga is to give these instructions. You wanna rest for a second?
Sure.
Yeah. I would give these instructions just one. So what do you think would be the best one to start with?
The tent pole of the post.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. So in every pose, you want to know, what is the tent pole? How do you build a pose around that? So that would be the safety of the back leg and the pelvis.
Right.
Everything else builds around that. And so I think that's a general principle that I wasn't taught.
Right.
I figured it out.
Yeah.
And then, worked from there.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's such a nice lesson in how things change, right?
Yeah.
As we have more information and
Right.
have a sense of, oh, this is a smarter way of working with the same
Right.
information.
Right, and instead of learning this idea of a tent pole and how to build it, many people just learn, do this with your hips.
Right.
And then everything else is supposed to magically come into place. And it magically doesn't come into place for most people. So I advocate the tent pole principle.
I love it. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. So we invite you to think about different ways that you learned how to teach yoga, that you're questioning, or that you might like to have, that you might have a question about. And you can write to us, and if you are interested, we can show you some more poses and how we've understood them with the tent pole principle and how you might try working with them.
Excellent.
Let's finish with our dedication. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be parted from freedom's true joy. May all beings dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion.